If you found a modern microchip buried in a 3,000-year-old tomb, would you believe your eyes? Across the globe, there are structures built with such surgical precision and gargantuan scale that they look less like ruins and more like high-tech relics from a future we haven't reached yet. History tells us that our ancestors were limited by copper tools, wooden rollers, and muscle power. But as we explore the scorched quarries of Egypt and the deep jungles of Peru, the official version begins to crumble. We find stones weighing over 1,000 tons, the weight of 3 Boeing 747s, moved across mountain ranges. We find granite polished to mirror-like finishes with an accuracy of a fraction of a hair's width. Is it possible that humanity isn't moving in a straight line from primitive to advanced? Or have we simply forgotten a chapter of our history where technology looked very different from our own? Today, we are going on a journey to 8 ancient wonders that look like they were pulled straight from a science fiction movie. We will look past the myths of giants and aliens to find the real technical genius of the ancients. Prepare yourself, because these structures won't just challenge what you know about the past, they will make you question the limits of what humans are truly capable of. Before we dive into the first mystery, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to discover might just change how you see human history forever. And as we travel through these ancient sites, I want you to ask yourself, what other primitive civilizations might have possessed knowledge we've only recently rediscovered? Now, let us begin. Our journey begins in the red granite quarries of Aswan, where a project was abandoned that would baffle a modern crane operator. The Egyptian sun hammers down on a gash in the earth that looks like it was carved by the hand of a titan. This is the unfinished obelisk, and it lies exactly where the ancient workers left it, still attached to the bedrock like a gigantic stone infant that never fully emerged from its womb. If it had been completed, this single piece of granite would have stood nearly 140 feet tall and weighed approximately 200 tons. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the weight of 200 African elephants, or 3 fully loaded Boeing 747 aircraft. And the ancient Egyptians intended to move this monolith not just a few feet, but potentially hundreds of miles down the Nile to its final destination. But here's where the story gets strange. Walk along the trenches surrounding the obelisk, and you'll see something that doesn't quite fit the narrative of primitive bronze chisels and patience. The surface of the granite is covered in what look like smooth, curved depressions, scoop marks that resemble the trail left by an ice cream scoop through frozen dessert. The marks are uniform, rhythmic, almost mechanical in their consistency. Granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth, ranking 7 on the Mohs scale of mineral hardness. To scratch it, you need something harder than the granite itself. The official archaeological record tells us that the Egyptians used dolerite pounding stones, dense, heavy rocks that were simply bashed against the granite surface thousands upon thousands of times until the stone gradually gave way. But does this explanation hold up under scrutiny? Engineers and stonemasons who have attempted to replicate these scoop marks using dolerite have found the process extraordinarily slow and inefficient. The marks produced are irregular, jagged, nothing like the smooth flowing curves visible at Aswan. Some researchers have calculated that using the pounding method, it would have taken teams of workers decades, not years, to carve out the trenches around the unfinished obelisk. So what really happened here? One controversial theory suggests that the Egyptians possessed knowledge of a technique to temporarily soften stone, perhaps through the use of specific plant-based acids or chemical compounds derived from natural sources. Proponents point to ancient texts that mention mysterious liquids capable of making stone like clay, while mainstream archaeology dismisses this as metaphor or myth. The precision of these scoop marks continues to whisper a different story. The more conservative explanation focuses on the possibility that the Egyptians used a combination of methods we haven't fully understood. Perhaps copper tools with abrasive quartz sand, applied with techniques that maximized efficiency in ways our modern reconstructions haven't quite captured. The rhythmic nature of the work, the specific angles of impact, the timing and coordination of hundreds of workers moving in synchronized patterns, All of this could account for results that look far more advanced than the individual tools would suggest. But there's another mystery embedded within this granite giant. The obelisk was abandoned suddenly, left incomplete due to a crack that appeared in the stone. Yet even in its unfinished state, it reveals something profound about the minds that conceived it. The precision required to plan such a massive extraction, to calculate the angles and depths needed to free a 200-ton object from solid bedrock without modern surveying equipment or computer modeling, suggests a level of geometric and engineering sophistication that we typically associate with much later periods of human development. The Egyptians understood stress points in stone, knew how to read the invisible grain and structure within granite, could predict where cracks might form and how to work around the natural weaknesses in the rock. This wasn't brute force. This was intimate knowledge born from generations of careful observation and handed-down expertise. Standing in those ancient trenches, with the desert wind carrying sand across stone-carved millennia ago, one question emerges clearly. If this is what they abandoned as a failure, what did their successes look like? And more importantly, what tools and techniques have we lost to the silence of time? From the dry heat of Egypt, we dive into the silence of the Pacific, where a diver looking for sharks found a fortress instead. In 1987, a local diver named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the waters off the southern coast of Yonaguni, the westernmost island of Japan, when he encountered something that would ignite decades of controversy. Beneath the waves, at a depth of approximately 25 to 30 meters, massive rock formations rose from the seabed like the ruins of a drowned city. But these weren't the irregular, chaotic shapes typically produced by natural erosion. The Yonaguni monument, as it came to be known, features geometric terraces, sharp 90-degree angles, smooth vertical walls, and what appear to be carved steps, pillars, and even a structure resembling a massive platform or arena. The formations stretch approximately 150 meters in length and 27 meters in height, creating an architectural landscape that looks deliberately planned and executed. The discovery triggered an immediate clash between geology and archaeology. Geologists examining the site pointed out that the rock is primarily medium to very fine sandstone and mudstone of the lower Miocene group, which naturally fractures along straight lines due to its sedimentary layers and tectonic stress patterns. They argued that what appears to be human engineering could simply be an unusually regular example of natural jointing and weathering, nature's own geometry lesson written in stone. But then, the details began to accumulate, and they told a more complicated story. There are tool marks visible on some surfaces, parallel grooves that suggest deliberate shaping. There are holes drilled into the rock at precise intervals, holes that serve no apparent natural function. There are stone objects found near the monument that appear to be carved representations of animals and symbols. And perhaps most intriguingly, there are structural features that seem to serve specific architectural purposes. Channels that could have directed water flow, platforms positioned at heights that suggest deliberate design. Marine geologist Masaki Kimura, who has dedicated decades to studying the monument, maintains that while nature provided the initial fracture patterns in the rock, human hands refined and modified these formations into something functional. He points to evidence of quarrying techniques, to the removal of specific blocks that created pathways and chambers, to the presence of what he believes are terraced agricultural platforms and defensive structures. If Kimura is correct, the monument would date back at least 10,000 years, to a time when this area would have been above sea level, before the dramatic sea level rise that occurred at the end of the last ice age. 10,000 years ago places this structure in a period when mainstream archaeology tells us that humanity was just beginning to transition from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled agricultural communities. The earliest known megalithic structures, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, date to roughly this same period and have already forced archaeologists to radically revise their timelines for complex human organization and monumental construction. Could Yonaguni represent another piece of this puzzle? Evidence of a sophisticated maritime culture that thrived along the coasts of the now submerged landmass known as Sonderland. The collaboration theory offers an elegant middle ground in this debate. It suggests that ancient people, observing the natural geometric formations created by the sandstone's fracture patterns, recognized an opportunity. Rather than carving everything from scratch, they worked with what nature had already provided, enhancing and modifying the natural terraces to create a functional complex, perhaps a ceremonial site, a fortress, or a sanctuary positioned at the edge of the ancient world. This interpretation doesn't require us to imagine laser-wielding ancient civilizations, but it does demand that we credit our ancestors with the intelligence to work alongside natural forces, rather than always working against them. It's a form of engineering that modern architecture is only beginning to rediscover, the art of adaptive construction that reads the landscape and responds to it rather than imposing rigid geometric will upon it. Swimming through the silent corridors of Yonaguni, with fish darting through what might be ancient doorways and sunlight filtering down through water that has covered these stones for 8 millennia, the questions multiply faster than the answers. If this is natural, why does it look so precisely functional? And if it's artificial, why do we have no other evidence of the civilization that built it? Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is this. What if Yonaguni isn't unique? What if the ocean floors around the world are hiding dozens, hundreds of similar sites, all drowned when the Ice Age ended and the seas rose by more than 300 feet? What if the civilization we think of as the first was actually preceded by something older, something whose greatest achievements now lie beneath waves? The stone keeps its secrets well. If Japan's mystery is written in the water, India's is carved into the very heart of the hardest granite on Earth. The Barabar caves, located in the rocky hills of the Jahanabad district in Bihar, India, are among the oldest surviving rock-cut caves on the Indian subcontinent. Dating back to the Mauryan period, around the 3rd century BCE, these caves were carved from solid granite, a stone so hard that it ranks among the most difficult materials to work with using any kind of hand tool. But it isn't the age of the caves that stops visitors in their tracks. It's the mirror. Step inside the Lomas Rishi cave or the Sudama cave, and the first thing you notice is the eerie perfection of the walls. They don't just look smooth, they look polished to a glass-like finish that seems impossible for their era. Run your hand along the surface, and you feel almost no texture, no tool marks, no irregularities. The granite has been worked to such a fine degree that in certain lighting conditions you can see your reflection staring back at you from stone that was carved more than 2,000 years ago. And then there's the sound. The acoustic properties of these caves are extraordinary. Speak, and your voice doesn't echo in the chaotic, overlapping way it does in most enclosed stone spaces. Instead, the sound resonates, amplifies, and sustains in a manner that suggests the chambers were designed with a deep understanding of acoustic engineering. Chant or sing, and the cave transforms into a natural amplifier, creating frequencies that seem to vibrate through your entire body. These aren't accidents. These are choices. But how were they achieved? Modern stonemasons examining the caves have expressed bewilderment at the level of precision required to create such surfaces. To polish granite to a mirror finish today, we use diamond-tipped tools, grinding machines, and a series of progressively finer abrasive compounds. The process is labor-intensive, even with modern equipment, requiring hours of work to achieve results on relatively small surfaces. The Barabar caves contain entire chambers polished to this standard. The official explanation suggests that ancient workers used a combination of iron tools and abrasive powders, likely quartz sand mixed with water, to slowly grind away at the granite surface in a process that would have taken months or even years per chamber. The workers would have employed a technique of patient, circular grinding, gradually smoothing away microscopic imperfections until the surface achieved its reflective quality. But this explanation, while technically possible, doesn't fully account for the acoustic precision. The caves aren't just smooth, they're tuned. The specific dimensions of the chambers, the curvature of the walls, the height of the ceilings, all of these factors contribute to the acoustic properties in ways that suggest intentional design rather than happy accident. Someone understood that sound behaves as a wave, that certain shapes and proportions would create specific resonant frequencies, that the very smoothness of the walls would affect how sound reflected and sustained within the space. This is knowledge we typically associate with much later periods of architectural development. Some researchers have proposed that the ancient builders used sound itself as a tool, that they tested the acoustic properties as they worked, using resonant frequencies to guide their polishing efforts, creating a feedback loop where the sound told them when they had achieved the correct surface quality. In this interpretation, the mirror finish wasn't the goal, but rather a byproduct of achieving perfect acoustic resonance. Others have suggested more esoteric purposes. The caves are believed to have been used by the Ajivika sect, an ancient ascetic movement that practiced meditation and sought spiritual enlightenment through rigorous discipline. Could these polished chambers have served as sensory deprivation environments, places where the combination of visual reflection and acoustic resonance created altered states of consciousness? Could the ancient architects have understood something about the relationship between environment, sound, and human psychology that we're only beginning to rediscover through modern neuroscience? The granite offers no easy answers. What we do know is that creating these caves required not just physical labor, but also profound patience and an almost obsessive attention to detail. Every square inch of these chambers represents hours of grinding, checking, adjusting, a meditation in stone that spanned years or decades. The future technology here wasn't lasers or power tools. It was something far more difficult to replicate. Absolute dedication combined with accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of master craftsmen who understood their material so intimately that they could coax impossible results from it using nothing but time, abrasive sand, and unwavering focus. Standing inside these caves, watching your reflection shimmer on 2,000-year-old granite while your voice seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You realize something profound. The ancients didn't need our technology because they possessed something we've largely lost, the patience to let time itself become the tool. How many other techniques have vanished simply because we no longer have the patience to practice them? In India, they mastered sound. Back in Egypt, they mastered a level of precision we only achieved with the Industrial Revolution. The Serapeum of Saqqara is one of Egypt's most enigmatic and least understood archaeological sites. Located within the vast necropolis of Saqqara, about 20 kilometers south of Cairo, the Serapeum consists of a series of tunnels carved deep into the bedrock, housing 24 enormous granite and basalt boxes known as sarcophagi. But calling them sarcophagi hardly does them justice. These aren't burial boxes in any conventional sense. Each one is carved from a single piece of granite or basalt, stones transported from quarries hundreds of miles away, and weighs between 70 and 100 tons. The boxes are approximately 13 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, and 11 feet tall, with walls that are nearly 2 feet thick. The lids alone weigh upward of 30 tons, and they're empty. No mummies have ever been found inside these massive containers. No inscriptions explain their purpose. No hieroglyphic records detail their construction. They simply sit in the darkness of the tunnels, monuments to a purpose we can no longer decipher. But it's the precision of these boxes that truly defies explanation. When engineer and researcher Christopher Dunn examined the sarcophagi with precision measuring instruments in the 1990s, he discovered something extraordinary. The interior surfaces of the boxes are machined to tolerances of 2/10,000ths of an inch, or approximately 5 micrometers. The corners inside the boxes form perfect 90-degree angles with flatness and squareness that meets or exceeds modern machining standards. To put this in perspective, this level of precision is what we expect from components in aerospace engineering or high-end manufacturing facilities. Environments where measurements are taken with laser interferometers and surfaces are created using computer-controlled grinding machines. The Egyptians allegedly achieved this with copper tools and sand. The challenge becomes even more perplexing when you consider the logistics. The tunnels leading to the chambers where these sarcophagi sit are narrow. Too narrow, in fact, to have allowed the finished boxes to be brought in from outside. This means the boxes were either carved in place or the tunnels were somehow enlarged after installation and then mysteriously reduced back to their current dimensions, or the boxes were assembled inside from smaller pieces using techniques so sophisticated they left no trace. None of these explanations are particularly satisfying. The abrasive slurry method offers the most widely accepted technical explanation for how such precision could be achieved with ancient technology. The theory proposes that workers used bow drills or tube drills made of copper, combined with a slurry of quartz, sand, and water. The copper itself doesn't cut the stone. Instead, it acts as a carrier for the abrasive sand particles, which do the actual grinding. By maintaining consistent pressure and continuously adding fresh abrasive slurry, workers could theoretically achieve very precise results over time. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that this method can indeed produce smooth, flat surfaces in hard stone. But replicating the level of precision found in the Serapeum sarcophagi has proven far more challenging. The technique requires not just the right tools and materials, but also an extraordinary degree of skill, consistency, and quality control. Workers who could maintain perfectly even pressure over hours of continuous work, who could check flatness and squareness using techniques we still don't fully understand, who could coordinate their efforts across the entire surface of a massive stone box to ensure that every wall matched every other wall to within microscopic tolerances. This isn't primitive technology. This is mastery. And here's a question for you. If you had to create something that would last 4,000 years and prove your civilization's technical sophistication to future generations, what would you build? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious what you'd choose. Some researchers have proposed more controversial theories. Graham Hancock and others have suggested that the Serapeum boxes might be remnants of a much older, technologically advanced civilization that predates dynastic Egypt, one that possessed machining capabilities we can't explain with the historical record as we currently understand it. They point to the lack of hieroglyphics on many of the boxes, the absence of these precision techniques in later Egyptian work, and the sheer impracticality of the objects as evidence that we're looking at something that doesn't fit our timeline. Mainstream Egyptology rejects these interpretations, noting that the site dates reliably to the New Kingdom period, specifically to the reign of Ramesses II, with some additions continuing into the Ptolemaic period. They maintain that attributing these works to a lost super-civilization requires extraordinary evidence, and that we should instead focus on understanding the capabilities of the Egyptians themselves. Capabilities that were clearly far more advanced than we often give them credit for. But this raises an uncomfortable question. If the Egyptians of Ramesses II's time could create objects with tolerance, why don't we see this level of precision consistently throughout Egyptian architecture? Why do these boxes represent a pinnacle of technical achievement that appears isolated, almost anomalous, within the broader context of Egyptian stonework? One possible answer is specialization. Perhaps the creation of these sarcophagi was the work of a specific guild of master craftsmen, possessing knowledge and techniques that were closely guarded and eventually lost. Perhaps the resources required, both in terms of time and materials, were so extraordinary that only the most important projects received this level of attention. Perhaps we're looking at the absolute peak of what Egyptian stoneworking could achieve when cost and time were no object, and the most skilled workers in the civilization were brought together for a single purpose. Walking through the tunnels of the Serapeum, standing beside these massive granite boxes that sit in the darkness like sleeping gods, you feel the weight of all that forgotten knowledge pressing down on you. The stone is cold to the touch, perfectly smooth, eerily precise, and utterly silent about the hands that shaped it. What secrets died with the masters who carved these impossible boxes? And what might we achieve if we possessed their patience, their focus, their intimate understanding of stone? While some built for the stars, others built to hide from them, carving a city 18 stories deep. Beneath the gentle hills of Cappadocia, in central Turkey, lies one of the most ambitious underground construction projects in human history. Derinkuyu, which translates to deep well, is an ancient multi-level underground city that descends approximately 85 meters into the earth, equivalent to an 18-story building, except inverted, burrowed downward into the volcanic rock rather than reaching toward the sky. And it wasn't built to impress visitors or honor gods. It was built for survival. The city could shelter an estimated 20,000 people, along with their livestock, food stores, and supplies, for extended periods of complete isolation from the surface world. It contains everything a population would need to survive: living quarters, stables, wine and oil presses, storage rooms, refectories, chapels, and even a cruciform church. But perhaps most remarkably, it features a sophisticated ventilation system with more than 15,000 shafts that provided fresh air to every level, ensuring that 20,000 people breathing and cooking and living wouldn't suffocate in the depths. The engineering required to create such a system without modern HVAC knowledge is staggering. The deepest shaft descends 55 meters and also functioned as a well, providing fresh water independent of any surface source, crucial for a population hiding from invaders or natural disaster. The city's multiple levels are connected by narrow passages that could be sealed from the inside using circular stone doors, massive rolling wheels of rock that weighed up to 500 kilograms each. These doors could be quickly moved into position to block corridors, and once in place, they were nearly impossible to breach from the outside. Derinkuyu was a fortress that faced inward, a bunker designed not just to shelter people but to make them disappear completely. But here's what makes this engineering marvel even more extraordinary: the material itself. The underground city is carved entirely from volcanic tuff, a relatively soft stone formed from volcanic ash that compressed and solidified over millions of years. When freshly exposed, tuff can be carved relatively easily using even primitive iron tools. But here's the ingenious part. Once exposed to air, the stone undergoes a chemical transformation. It hardens, becoming significantly more durable and resistant to erosion, essentially turning into a form of natural concrete. The ancient builders understood this property intimately. They exploited the softness of the unexposed tuff to carve out their chambers and passages, knowing that time and air exposure would harden their work into something permanent and strong. It's a form of self-finishing architecture. The building material improves itself after construction. This understanding of material science, of how substances change their properties under different conditions, represents a level of empirical knowledge that required generations of observation and experimentation. But who built Derinkuyu and why? The earliest written references to underground cities in this region come from the Greek historian Xenophon in the 5th century BCE, where he describes people living in underground dwellings. However, archaeological evidence suggests that the earliest levels of Derinkuyu may date back even further, possibly to the Phrygians around the 8th century BCE, or potentially earlier. The city was expanded and modified by successive civilizations: Phrygians, Persians, Christians fleeing persecution during the Roman period, and Byzantines defending against Arab raids. Each culture added layers, refinements, new chambers, adapting the space to their specific needs. The Christian additions are particularly notable, with several chapels and religious spaces carved into the existing structure during the Byzantine era. This multi-generational, multicultural construction process reveals something fascinating about how ancient people approached large-scale engineering projects. They didn't see structures as static, finished objects, but as living spaces that could evolve and grow as needs changed. Derinkuyu was continually reimagined, rebuilt, and repurposed across millennia. The defensive purpose of the city speaks to the harsh realities of ancient life in Cappadocia. Located along invasion routes between Asia and Europe, the region faced constant threats from conquering armies. But the depth and sophistication of Derinkuyu suggests the builders feared something more than just human enemies. Some historians propose that the cities may have originated during periods of catastrophic climate events or volcanic activity, providing shelter from ash clouds or extreme temperature swings. Others suggest they offered protection during times of religious persecution, allowing entire communities to vanish underground for months or even years, maintaining their way of life in secret while the surface world churned with violence. The ventilation system alone represents engineering prowess that wouldn't be matched in underground construction until the modern era. The shafts are positioned to create natural air circulation through convection. Warm air rises through certain shafts, while cooler air descends through others, creating a continuous flow that doesn't require any mechanical assistance. Even today, visitors to Derinkuyu can feel fresh air moving through passages carved 1,500 years ago or more. Modern engineers studying the site have noted that the placement of these ventilation shafts, the angles of the passages, and the distribution of chambers all demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of airflow dynamics, structural load distribution, and even crowd management, how to move thousands of people through narrow spaces without creating dangerous bottlenecks. This wasn't trial and error. This was planned, calculated, executed with precision. Derinkuyu was rediscovered in 1963 when a local resident found a mysterious room behind a wall in his house. That room led to another, which led to a passage, which led downward into the dark. Since then, archaeologists have explored and mapped the city, but estimates suggest that only about 10% of the full complex has been excavated and open to the public. Beneath your feet, in the stone under Cappadocia, entire neighborhoods remain sealed and unexplored, silent chambers that haven't seen light in centuries. What else lies waiting in the dark? And how many other underground cities exist, still undiscovered, beneath regions where ancient peoples had every reason to hide? Derinkuyu reminds us that sometimes the most advanced technology isn't about reaching higher or building larger. Sometimes it's about going deeper, about understanding that survival doesn't always mean standing your ground. Sometimes it means vanishing into the earth itself. In Turkey, they carved into the earth. In Peru, they made the earth flow together like liquid. High in the Andes Mountains, overlooking the ancient Incan capital of Cusco, 3 massive walls snake across the hillside in a zigzag pattern that seems to defy both gravity and geometry. These are the walls of Sacsayhuamán, and they represent perhaps the most perplexing example of stone masonry in the entire ancient world. The largest stones in these walls weigh over 100 tons, comparable to a blue whale or a commercial airliner. But it's not the size that stops archaeologists in their tracks. It's the fit. The stones of Sacsayhuamán don't follow any conventional masonry pattern. Instead of rectangular blocks stacked in regular courses, the builders used massive, irregularly shaped polygonal stones that interlock like a 3-dimensional jigsaw puzzle designed by someone with an obsession for complexity. Each stone has multiple faces, each cut at different angles, each fitting perfectly against its neighbors. And when we say perfectly, we mean it literally. The joints between these stones are so tight that you cannot slide a knife blade between them. In many places, you cannot even slip a piece of paper into the gaps. After 500 years of earthquakes, and Peru experiences seismic activity regularly, the stones remain locked together so precisely that the walls have survived virtually intact, while Spanish colonial buildings in nearby Cusco have crumbled repeatedly. How is this possible? The conventional archaeological explanation states that the Incas shaped these stones using harder river stones as hammers, gradually pecking away at the surface in a process they called pounding and grinding. They would have used water and sand as abrasives, created wooden templates to check shapes and angles, and employed teams of workers who slowly, patiently, methodically shaped each stone until it fit perfectly against its neighbors. But the mathematics of this explanation start to break down when you examine what would actually be required. Each irregular stone has multiple contact surfaces, each surface meeting adjacent stones at specific angles. To achieve the precision visible at Sacsayhuamán, the workers would need to have shaped each stone to tolerances of less than a millimeter across surfaces that measure several meters. They would have had to repeatedly lift multi-ton stones into position to check the fit, lower them to make adjustments, lift them again, adjust again. in an iterative process that could have taken months or years per stone. And they did this for walls that stretch for nearly a third of a mile. The labor calculation is staggering. Some estimates suggest that creating Sacsayhuamán using Bronze Age technology would have required 20,000 workers laboring continuously for 60 years or more. Yet Incan historical records, as recorded by Spanish chroniclers shortly after the conquest, claim the complex was built in just a few decades. Something doesn't add up. This is where the controversial theories enter the conversation. Some researchers have proposed that the Incas possessed a method to temporarily soften stone, to make it plastic, moldable, almost clay-like, allowing them to press the massive blocks together like modeling putty. Once the stones were positioned, according to this theory, they would harden back into solid rock, maintaining their perfect fit. The evidence cited for this softening theory includes what appears to be a pillowing effect visible on some stones, slight bulges and irregular surface textures that look more like something molded than something carved. There are also local legends among Andean peoples describing a plant that could soften stone, though no such plant has ever been identified or verified scientifically. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these theories as unnecessary and unsupported by chemical or physical evidence. Geologists analyzing the stones have found no indication of chemical alteration, no signs of any process that would have changed the molecular structure of the rock. But there's a middle ground that's worth considering, one that credits the Incas with extraordinary ingenuity without requiring impossible chemistry. The thermal shaping theory proposes that the Incas might have used concentrated solar heat focused through curved mirrors or polished metal surfaces to selectively heat the surfaces of the stones. Stone expands when heated and can become slightly more brittle in specific ways. By carefully controlling the heating and cooling of contact surfaces, workers could have created micro-fractures that made final shaping easier, or exploited thermal expansion to force stones into tighter fits than would otherwise be possible. There's also the plant acid theory, more grounded than the stone softening legends, but still speculative. Some researchers have suggested that acids derived from certain Andean plants might have been used to slightly etch stone surfaces, making them easier to shape or allowing workers to create the final micro-adjustments needed for perfect fits. While no direct evidence of this technique exists, it's worth noting that various cultures worldwide have used plant-based chemicals for metallurgy and other technical processes we're still discovering. But perhaps the most important insight comes from understanding that the Incas approached stonework in a fundamentally different way than modern builders. They didn't work from blueprints. They didn't measure to predetermined specifications. Instead, they worked organically, fitting each stone individually to the unique shapes of its neighbors, creating walls that grew more like organisms than machines, walls that adapted to the landscape, that incorporated natural rock formations, that followed the contours of the hillside rather than imposing geometric regularity upon it. This is visible in the way the walls curve and zigzag, creating a design that isn't just aesthetically striking, but also structurally brilliant. The zigzag pattern distributes seismic energy during earthquakes, preventing the kind of catastrophic failure that occurs when shock waves travel unimpeded through straight walls. The irregular shapes of the stones mean that seismic motion causes them to lock together more tightly rather than pull apart. The Incas built these walls to dance with the earth, not fight against it. Here's something to think about. If ancient civilizations could achieve this level of precision without our modern tools, what does that say about our assumption that newer technology always equals better results? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're finding this journey as mind-bending as I am, don't forget to subscribe. We've got 3 more ancient mysteries to explore. Modern stonemasons who have visited Sacsayhuamán express a kind of professional awe at what they see. Jean-Pierre Protzen, a professor of architecture who spent years studying Incan construction techniques, conducted extensive experiments attempting to replicate their methods. He confirmed that the pounding technique could indeed shape even hard andesite stone, but he also noted that it required extraordinary skill. Workers who could read the stone, who understood exactly where and how hard to strike to remove material without creating unwanted fractures. This skill level represents generations of accumulated knowledge, of apprenticeship systems where masters passed techniques to students who would spend lifetimes perfecting their craft. It represents entire communities organized around the specialized work of moving and shaping stone with social structures that could support such specialization. What we're looking at in Sacsayhuamán isn't the work of primitive people with primitive tools. We're looking at the pinnacle achievement of a civilization that had optimized a specific technology, stonework, to a degree that we, with all our modern advantages, find difficult to replicate. The question isn't whether they could have done it with their technology. They did do it. The walls still stand. The question is, what else might humans achieve when we combine deep specialization, multi-generational knowledge transfer, and absolute dedication to mastery of a specific craft? And what have we lost by becoming generalists in a world that values rapid innovation over patient perfection? From the mountains of the Andes, we traveled to a tiny island that became the Venice of the Pacific, built with magnets and magic, according to legend. Off the eastern shore of Pohnpei, one of the Caroline Islands in Micronesia, a vast complex of artificial islets rises from a shallow lagoon. This is Nan Madol, a name that translates roughly to the place of the spaces between, and it consists of nearly 100 small artificial islands connected by a network of canals. The entire city covers approximately 200 acres and was built atop a coral reef using massive basalt logs, columnar basalt stones formed by ancient volcanic activity that naturally fractures into hexagonal prisms, some weighing up to 50 tons each. The total weight of basalt used in the construction is estimated at 750,000 metric tons. Let that sink in for a moment. 750,000 tons of volcanic rock were transported across water, positioned carefully atop a reef system, and assembled into walls, platforms, and structures, all accomplished by a population that likely never exceeded a few thousand people, working without metal tools, without wheels, without draft animals, and without the benefit of a large labor pool. The logistical impossibility of this achievement has given rise to some of the region's most persistent legends. Local oral traditions claim that the massive stones didn't need to be moved by human muscle. Instead, they flew through the air, guided by magical incantations, or floated across the water like boats. The sorcerers who founded Nan Madol, according to legend, simply commanded the stones to move, and they obeyed. Modern engineers looking at the site understand the appeal of magical explanations. The basalt logs used in construction came from quarries on the opposite side of Pohnpei, or in some cases, from the nearby island of Soques. This means the stones were transported distances of up to 25 kilometers across open ocean through coral reefs and then precisely positioned in the shallow waters of the lagoon. Some of the largest stones sit at the bottom of structures that are 6 meters high, meaning workers somehow lowered multi-ton basalt logs into position underwater, then built upward in courses that had to remain stable while submerged. The raft theory proposes the most practical explanation: that the builders used rafts or outrigger canoes lashed together to create floating platforms capable of supporting the basalt logs. By timing their transport with high tides and using the natural buoyancy of the water to support most of the weight, small crews could theoretically move stones that would be unmovable on land. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that this method is feasible, at least on a small scale. Researchers have successfully transported basalt columns weighing several tons using traditional Pacific watercraft. But scaling this up to the size and scope of Nan Madol requires not just feasibility, but a level of organizational sophistication and sustained effort over generations. Carbon dating and archaeological evidence suggest that major construction at Nan Madol began around 1200 CE. And continued for several centuries, with the site serving as the ceremonial and political center of the Saudileur dynasty, which ruled Pohnpei and surrounding islands. And here's where the true genius and darkness of Nan Madol becomes clear. The artificial islands weren't built for defense against external enemies. They were built to create absolute control over the internal population. The Saudaleur rulers constructed Nan Madol on the reef specifically to separate themselves geographically from the common people living on the main island. The complex included royal residences, administrative centers, burial vaults for the nobility, and temples. But it also featured something more insidious: carefully controlled access points. By building on artificial islands connected by narrow waterways, the rulers created a capital that could only be accessed by boat. This meant they could monitor and control every person entering or leaving, every resource flowing in or out. It was a golden cage that enhanced the ruler's power by creating physical barriers that reinforced social hierarchies. This explains one of the great mysteries of Nan Madol. Why would anyone expend such enormous effort to build a major city on a reef when there was abundant land available on the main island? The answer is that the difficulty itself was the point. The sheer monumental scale of Nan Madol served as a constant, visible reminder of the Saudaleur's power, their ability to command labor, to organize massive projects, to reshape the landscape itself according to their will. It was architecture as propaganda. But this system contained the seeds of its own destruction. The oral histories of Pohnpei tell of a tyrant ruler named Saudaleur Ripewenlang, whose oppression became so severe that the people appealed to a legendary warrior named Isokelekel to liberate them. Isokelekel invaded Pohnpei from Khosrai around 1628, defeated the Saudaleur dynasty, and established a new system of rule. After the fall of the Saudaleurs, Nan Madol was gradually abandoned. The massive effort required to maintain the complex, combined with the end of the centralized authority that had forced its construction, meant that nature began slowly reclaiming the artificial islands. Today, the site sits largely empty, the massive walls slowly being pulled apart by mangrove roots, the canals silting up, the grand vision of absolute power slowly dissolving back into the reef. Walking through the ruins of Nan Madol, wading through canals where fish swim through what were once royal corridors, you witness something rarely preserved so clearly in archaeology: the physical manifestation of political ideology. Every stone in every wall is a testament not just to engineering capability, but to social organization, to the systems of power that could command such effort, and to the human cost of monumental architecture. The builders of Nan Madol solved extraordinary engineering challenges. Yes, they moved 750,000 tons of rock using pre-industrial technology. They created a city on water that still stands after 800 years of tropical storms and tidal fluctuations. But they also built a monument to the idea that power deserves to be elevated, separated, made physically unreachable, an idea that ultimately proved unsustainable. The stones didn't fly through the air by magic. They were moved by human hands, human ingenuity, and human sweat, often under human coercion. The true magic of Nan Madol lies not in how it was built, but in what it reveals about the complex relationship between architectural achievement and political power, between engineering prowess and social organization, between what humans can accomplish and what they should. The ghosts of Nan Madol whisper a warning across the centuries. Just because we can build something doesn't always mean we should. We end our journey where nature and architecture become one, a 9-story building carved from the top down. In the village of Ellora, in the Indian state of Maharashtra, there sits a temple that violates every conventional understanding of how buildings are constructed. The Kailasa temple isn't built, it's carved. The entire structure, from the tallest Saqqara towers to the deepest courtyards, from the intricate sculptures to the massive pillars, is one continuous piece of rock, excavated from a single hillside of volcanic basalt. This isn't assembly, this is subtraction. The ancient architects began at the top of the cliff face and worked their way down, removing an estimated 200,000 to 400,000 tons of solid rock. Enough material to build several Egyptian pyramids, to reveal the temple hidden within the mountain. And they left no room for error. Every sculpture, Every pillar, every architectural detail had to be perfect on the first attempt, because once rock is removed, it cannot be replaced. There are no second chances in vertical excavation. The scale alone is breathtaking. The main temple stands approximately 90 feet tall, equivalent to a 9-story building, and covers an area twice the size of the Parthenon in Athens. The complex includes a main shrine, a towering entrance gateway, a massive courtyard surrounded by columned galleries, several smaller shrines, and elaborate bridge connections between structures, all carved from continuous bedrock. But it's the artistry that truly defies explanation. Every surface is covered in intricate sculptural reliefs depicting scenes from Hindu mythology. Gods, demons, elephants, lions, and humans emerge from the stone in such detail that their faces show individual emotions. Their bodies convey motion and weight. Their drapery falls in naturalistic folds. These aren't simple decorative elements. They're narrative masterpieces, telling complex stories in three-dimensional stone. And this was all accomplished while working downward, carving into the earth, removing everything that wasn't temple. The conventional dating, based on architectural style and inscriptions found at the site, attributes the Kailasa temple to the Rashtrakuta, King Krishna I, who ruled in the 8th century CE. According to this timeline, construction likely took place between 756 and 773 CE, approximately 17 to 18 years. Even allowing for a workforce of thousands, this timeline seems impossibly compressed. Modern engineers have calculated that removing 200,000 tons of solid basalt in 18 years would require excavating approximately 30 tons of rock per day, every single day, for nearly 2 decades. This doesn't even account for the time needed to create the intricate carvings, to shape the architectural details, to ensure structural stability as the excavation progressed deeper into the cliff. One archaeological tradition suggests that 7,000 laborers worked continuously for 150 years, a far more realistic timeline that would allow for the combination of removal and artistic work. But this longer timeline conflicts with the historical attributions and architectural analysis. So how was it really done? The vertical excavation technique itself offers some answers. By starting at the top and working downward, the builders could use gravity as an advantage. Removed rock could be rolled or carried downhill rather than lifted. Scaffolding became simpler. Workers could stand on the level they were currently excavating while working on the level below. And crucially, the natural drainage of a vertical excavation meant water wouldn't pool and create problems, as it would in horizontal tunneling. But the actual cutting of the basalt required more sophisticated techniques. Research suggests that the ancient workers used the swelling wood method, a technique where wooden wedges were driven into natural cracks in the rock, then soaked with water. As the wood absorbed water and expanded, it created tremendous pressure, causing the rock to split along predictable lines. This method allowed workers to remove large sections of stone relatively quickly compared to chiseling. For finer work and detailed carving, they employed iron chisels and hammers, working with the natural fracture patterns in the basalt to guide their cuts. The volcanic basalt at Ellora has natural columnar jointing. It fractures in relatively straight lines, which would have made the initial rough excavation more manageable than it might seem. But technique alone doesn't fully explain the Kailasa temple. What truly elevates this structure is the vision, the ability to look at a solid hillside and see with absolute clarity the complex three-dimensional architecture hidden within it. The master planners couldn't work from trial and error. They needed to visualize the entire temple before the first stone was removed, to understand how each level would connect to the next, to anticipate structural stresses and plan for them, to coordinate dozens of different work crews all cutting away at different sections while ensuring that everything would align perfectly when they met. This required architectural plans of extraordinary sophistication, possibly drawn on palm leaves or cloth, none of which have survived, and a level of mathematical and geometric knowledge that allowed them to translate those plans into precise three-dimensional execution. And it required faith. Faith that the vision would hold. Faith that the rock wouldn't contain fatal flaws that would only be revealed after months of work. Faith that the structure would stand once the supporting rock around it was removed. Legend holds that when Krishna first saw the completed temple, he could hardly believe it had been achieved. "How wonderful to verify through evidence what was taken to be a joke," he allegedly exclaimed, a quote that, whether historically accurate or not, captures the improbability of what had been accomplished. The Kailasa temple is often called impossible, but it exists, it stands. Visitors walk through its courtyards and marvel at its sculptures every day. What it really represents is the ultimate expression of certainty over accumulation, the philosophy that it's better to create one perfect, permanent statement than to build multiple experimental iterations. It's the opposite of modern agile development or rapid prototyping. It's the slow, deliberate, irreversible act of revealing something eternal. Standing at the base of the temple, looking up at the main Saqqara tower that was never built, but rather discovered within the mountain, you realize that the ancient architects understood something we've largely forgotten. Sometimes the greatest achievements come not from addition, but from removal, not from building up, but from carving away everything that isn't essential until only the truth remains. The mountain didn't need to be conquered, it needed to be understood, studied, known, so intimately that the temple within it could be revealed without breaking a single critical structural element. That's not primitive, that's visionary. We've traveled from the granite quarries of Egypt to the ocean depths of Japan, from the mirror caves of India to the underground cities of Turkey, from the impossible jigsaw of Peru to the floating fortress of Micronesia, and finally, to a temple carved from the top of a mountain down to its roots. And through them all, a single thread emerges. The ancients weren't primitive, they were specialized. Where we have breadth of capability, able to build almost anything, anywhere, using standardized materials and mass-produced tools, they had depth. They understood their materials with an intimacy we've traded away for versatility. They possessed techniques refined over centuries, passed from master to apprentice through chains of knowledge that stretched across generations. They had something we increasingly lack. Patience measured not in quarters or years, but in lifetimes and dynasties. And perhaps that's the real revelation of our journey. We've spent these pages asking, how did they do it? But maybe the better question is, why can't we? Not because we lack the technology. Obviously, we have tools that would make these projects technically easier. But because we've lost something in our pursuit of efficiency and scale. We've lost the apprenticeship systems that created masters. We've lost the social structures that could dedicate generations to a single project. We've lost the cultural patience that measured success not by quarterly results, but by what would still stand 1,000 years hence. The ancient builders worked under a different set of constraints and within a different framework of values. Time was abundant. Precision was sacred. The work itself was a form of devotion, whether to gods or kings or simply to the ideal of perfection. The structures we've explored don't look ahead of their time. They look exactly right for the deep time and focused expertise that created them. What looks futuristic to us is simply the result of taking fundamentally simple tools, hammers, wedges, abrasives, patience, and applying them with a level of mastery we can barely imagine, because we rarely stick with anything long enough to truly master it anymore. Perhaps the real lesson of these ancient structures isn't about technology at all. Perhaps it's about the relationship between knowledge and time, between mastery and permanence, and between what we can build quickly and what we can build to last. The ancients didn't have YouTube tutorials or engineering degrees. They had mentors and decades of practice. They had traditions that valued perfection over speed and permanence over novelty. They built things meant to outlast not just themselves, but their entire civilizations, and in many cases, they succeeded. So the next time you hear someone describe ancient peoples as primitive, think of the 100-ton stones fitted together so precisely that earthquakes can't pull them apart. Think of the underground city with ventilation systems that still work after 1,500 years. Think of the temple carved from a mountain without a single structural failure. And ask yourself, who are the real primitives? The people who could achieve perfection with simple tools, or the people who struggle to achieve permanence with all the advantages of modern technology? One final question for you, and I genuinely want to hear your thoughts. If you could go back in time and observe the construction of any one of these 8 ancient structures, which would you choose and why? Leave your answer in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe because there are still so many mysteries waiting to be explored. See you.